So welcome. Thank you all so much for joining our item writing training webinar tonight. Looks like we have a few new item writers and a few experienced item writers who have been involved with projects before. Tonight, we're just discussing item writing components, best practices, and going to do a little run through of the remote item writing system. I'm Amy. I am an exam program manager for all of the ECHO exams as well as OBGYN.
Hi, everyone. I'm Darlene. I'm also EPM for MSKS, SVTGBI, which is the group out of the UK, the midwife, and then the VT group.
Evening all, my name is Mischa. I'm the manager of test development for the ARDMS program. So I work with Amy, Darlene, and a couple other of our talented program managers to help facilitate our item and test development work with our core volunteers. So thanks so much for joining tonight. I should just add before Amy and Darlene get into the juicy part of the presentation, I just wanted to take a few minutes and say thank you so much for everyone's time who's joining tonight. If it's not clear to you, all of our test development and item development work relies heavily on volunteer subject matter expertise. Basically our core registrants, sonographers who help us put together all these tests. Every item that makes it to an exam is not only written by credentialed sonographers, but also peer reviewed by such. So really expertise that our volunteers lend us is integral to our ability to produce and validate these exams. So certainly appreciate your interest. We'll try to keep it interesting tonight. And if you have questions thereafter, please fill out our survey and let us know what you think, and we'd be more than happy to get you involved. For new volunteers, we offer a mentoring program. So there's a peer-to-peer interaction at the beginning, and we really want to engage new volunteers across the board, across all our assessments. We're always looking to get new perspectives and involvement. So again, just wanted to say thank you for your time, and I will hand it off to Amy and Darlene. Before doing that, let me just mention one housekeeping item. As we go through this, if you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat, and I'll funnel those up to Amy and Darlene towards the end of the call so we can address those issues. But thanks again, and I hope you enjoy yourselves tonight.
Great, thank you, Mischa. All right, let me move on here. Okay, so to get started, this is just an example of a multiple choice item. This is the item type that we use for item writing from our volunteers. There are also other item types that we have on our exams, but they're a little bit more complex. So they're made in a collaborative space as a group, just because, for example, I don't know if you've ever experienced hotspots or pack sims, but they require a few more components. And so it's better to work peer-to-peer to complete those item types. But as you can see here, there is the question, which we call the stem. And then we have the key, which is the correct answer. And note that there's only one correct answer. It's really important to make sure that when you're creating the answer choices that you don't have two that are correct. The three incorrect answers are called distractors. They're plausible, but incorrect. So that's really how we test the candidate's competency for answering the question. And while creating test questions for certification exams, it's really important to keep in mind the cognitive demand of an item. Cognitive demand is defined as the thinking skills used by a typical test taker to arrive at the correct response. And you can see on this pyramid here, the different levels of cognitive demand from lowest to highest. Knowledge comprehension is at the lower level, and then application analysis is in the middle, and then at the very top, evaluation and synthesis. So we have items across all levels of cognitive demand for our exams, but we really do strive to try to create items that are higher level thinking. So it would be like towards the middle or top of the cognitive demand pyramid, also known as Bloom's taxonomy, if anyone has heard of that. And while considering this, it's really important to not confuse it with item difficulty. The example item listed, when was ultrasound first used for medical purposes, is a pretty difficult question because no one really knows that. It's trivial knowledge. And so we really want items that really test a candidate's clinical competency and match our content outline to be the items that we're using on our exam forms. And this just goes into more detail about the different levels of the cognitive demand pyramid. Knowledge and comprehension, a description of this is to simply recall a fact, information, or procedure. Some sample action verbs that you might see in a STEM for this level are define, identify, recognize, recall, those sorts of words. And an example of an item in this level is, according to ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable guidelines, which parameters should be minimized? So the answer choices are frequency, transmit power, time gain compensation, and overall gain. And transmit power is the correct answer. Okay. And then on to the middle level, application and analysis. So this engages mental processes beyond habitual response using information or conceptual knowledge. Usually these types of questions require 2 or more steps, or you have to use reasoning, deductive reasoning. Some sample action verbs for this are apply, use, measure, obtain, compare, and calculate. So those would be words that would be seen in a STEM with this level of thinking. And an example is, what is the Nyquist limit if a pulse wave Doppler instrument has a pulse repetition frequency of 16 kilohertz? And the answer choice is 5, 8, 10, and 32. Correct answer being 8. And I know these example items are kind of all like physicsy, I think. So sorry about that, because I know that isn't the most interesting topic sometimes. All right, and last but not least, our highest level of cognitive demand is evaluation and synthesis. So this is to make judgments based on criteria and standards, putting parts together of different pieces, considerations to make a whole, and using complex reasoning skills. Some sample action verbs for this are analyze, assess, evaluate, synthesize, correlate. And sorry, the image is kind of off to the side awkwardly. I just wanted it to fit within the PowerPoint slide. But this example here, which structure is indicated by the arrow on this image? And you can see that there's an arrow on the image pointing to a structure. Answer choices are esophagus, common carotid artery, longus colli muscle, and internal jugular vein. And D is the correct answer. So you can see using images really helps with having a higher level of cognitive demand because it requires them to apply their knowledge to the image. So all of our items have to face the facts. And that's a fun little acronym for making sure that they are fair, appropriate, current, and technically accurate. So a fair item has to not advantage or disadvantage any specific candidate group. So we have to make sure the language is kind of consistent across all areas, all regions, and that the content doesn't really have any bias. And also, if an item is appropriate, it would be within the scope of practice, and also it would be classified to a task on the content outline. And our content outline is kind of like a roadmap for what we're wanting the candidates to know to be able to be successful. And if a test item is current, it would be reflective of current practice, because I know there's always updates going on. And so you got to make sure that we are testing current knowledge and things within the field. So also we have to make sure that the items are referenced to a well-recognized source. And of course, they need to be technically accurate because we don't want to test things that are incorrect. So we just want to make sure that they're valid and appropriate for different practice situations, and that the key is identified correctly, of course. And here is a pretty long list of item writing guidelines. We're not going to go over each of these. I'm just going to let you look at them for a minute. But I will say that in the volunteer resources portal, there are a lot of documents that have these sorts of resources for you to review when you're beginning your item writing. So I'll just keep it here for a minute. So now we're going to go into some examples where we can apply these guidelines.
So as Amy just mentioned, those guidelines that you just saw, here are some examples using those general writing guidelines. So in looking at this one, what are the normal measurements of a uterus? It is a bit confusing with all of the distractors and the key. They all have different numbers on there, and you have to really study it to look at it. Also, it's probably a better way to write the item if you put the measurements actually in the stem, most of the words. And then we also want to look at the patient profiles, which is probably more important than 6 centimeters long, 5 centimeters wide, and 4 centimeters thick. So it's just a better way to write the item. And we're using guidelines 5 and 10 of write items to assess important material, which is the patient profiles, and then putting the majority of the words in the actual stem.
Okay.
So another example shown is which condition is characterized by shortness of breath when the patient is in the recumbent position? Well, the answer options are somewhat of layperson's terminology and not really testing the candidate's knowledge. And they're also not very consistent. I mean, if you look at asthma, fainting, orthopnea, and snoring, they're not really consistent. The better way to list the answer option is to keep them homogeneous and similar but plausible. So at the bottom, you will see that we've used guidelines 11, 13, and 15. Apnea, dyspnea, hypernia, excuse my pronunciation, and orthopnea. You can see that they're all pretty well homogenized, and the candidate would need to know what each of those are in order to get the answer correctly.
Do we have any questions about that before we move on? Okay, looks like we have a couple questions not related to the content of the slide, so we'll answer those at the end. Thank you for your patience. All right, so next up here, this is also located in the volunteer resources portal, but here are some general quick start stems. I know when you get started with item writing, sometimes it can be hard to figure out how to word something. So we have a few hints here of just the way things are typically worded and just the general formatting, which is helpful and can help spark some inspiration. I'll just read a couple of them here. So one of them is, which symptoms are commonly associated with blank? Which scanning technique would have some sort of result? And which sonographic view best demonstrates some condition or some kind of, characteristic of the sort. And here are some other useful terms that are used pretty often within our items just based on, the content that we're testing. We do want to make sure that when we include images, especially with arrows, but really all images or videos, that we reference that image or video in the stem. So we say indicated by the arrow in this image, or what is visualized in this video, or something along those lines. So yeah, here are some terms, and those are also located online in the volunteer resources portal for your review when you're writing your items. So what happens after you write and submit an item? We have a pretty extensive internal review process. So I'll just go over the different steps of review here. The first step after you submit your item, if you have a mentor, it will first go to your mentor for them to give you feedback and to approve. But then once it goes to the internal end, an editor looks at the item to check the grammar, check the formatting, style guidelines, all of that, spelling errors, that kind of stuff. And then it goes to our in-house clinical specialist. And this is actually a subject matter expert that is hired on the internal end here at ARDMS, who holds credentials, and they just do a check of the item to make sure that it is clinically relevant, reflective of current practice, and meets all the other criteria. And then we get our committee, which is a group of subject matter experts on the committee for a specific credential exam, to look at it, make any edits that might need to be made, and then to send it off for final approval before putting it out on a form. And we put them out for pre-testing first, so they're not going to get scored right away because we want to see how they do statistically. And once an item is out for pre-testing and it comes back after all the candidates have taken the exam, then the statisticians evaluate the performance metrics to see how well it did, how many people got it right, if the more successful test takers did really well on this item, or if they maybe didn't do as well on this item. A few things indicate some issues. And so then it kind of, depending on the results, it might go back to the drawing board for some tweaking.
Oh, okay, great, great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our remote item writing. So once you have signed up to be an item writer and completed the online training, you'll be assigned to a project of your choice. For example, if you wish to write for the breast exam, you will be placed in the project and given full instructions along with a password to access the portal. We write items remotely through this online portal, and we're just going to kind of give you a brief tutorial of that. So what you do, you would just simply log in with your ARDMS or your app ID number and then the password that you were assigned. So once you get into the portal, you will see a login screen that looks similar to this. Again, you would just insert your ARDMS ID number or your APCA number and the password that you were assigned. You'll also have the option that once you get in, you can change the password to something that you'll remember, something that you're more comfortable with. Okay, so like I said, I'm just going to give a very brief tutorial of the writing portal. And once you are added, you will receive full instructions with images. We have a little booklet that we have that has like screenshots of everything that you'll be able to see and what you would insert in each area. But this is your main dashboard that you're looking at now. And you can see all of the projects that you may be involved in. And for item writings. So for instance, there's the BRIS 2020 item writing project. If that's the project that you're assigned to, that's the one that you're going to stick to. So the next slide, I think we're going to go into maybe creating an item all the way to the right.
Yep.
Okay, so with that project, next to your project, you're going to see the words create item. And once we click on that, that will take you to the actual item writing screen. And we're going to show you that in just a moment. But you'll need to have your reference materials handy as well as your content outline, because in order to submit an item, you're going to need to reference it either by a textbook or a peer-reviewed article, and the current content outline, because you will have to code the item to the latest content outline. And yeah, okay, next. Sorry.
It's fine.
That's okay. So then when you've completed writing the item, and what you're going to need for each one is like what Amy just kind of described: the stem, which is the actual question, the key is the correct answer, the 3 distractors, the classification code, which is from the content outline, and a reference material. And then you can submit your items for a mentor review. What a mentor is somebody that is a lot more seasoned with looking at items and reviewing them, and they do provide feedback for your items, and you have the opportunity then to either fix them or rewrite them, and then you can resubmit them. Okay, so do we want to look at the actual portal now, Amy?
Yep, I am going to go in there right now and just give a brief overview of what we looked at in the screenshots here.
Okay.
So this is that main dashboard. And as Darlene said, if you wanted to start creating an item, you can click this create item button, or you can actually go into the project itself, and there's a way to start creating an item from there as well. And I'll just show you in here. This kind of shows some general info. If you've submitted items before, it will list them here. And if you have a mentor, it'll also let you know if you have anything that your mentor reviewed and anything that, you know, is kind of in like the queue for you to look at. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit create item. Okay, took a second to load there.
Yeah.
So each thing is labeled here. So you can type the STEM or the question in this line. What color is the sky? And if you wanted to add images, there's little buttons here that you can either upload an image of your own that you have, or you can search within the image bank, which is basically like the inventory of images that people have submitted in the past. So if you just want to find a picture of atrial fibrillation, for example, you can just kind of search through and find one that might work for you. And over here on the right, there is the task, and this is the way to classify it. So you would need to figure out what topic you're writing to and select it from there. And then down here, you can write the answer choices. So green, blue, purple, orange. And then to indicate the correct answer, you have to select this little circle here next to whichever one is correct. And then from there, there's a few sections if you wanted to include a rationale or just any additional information about why you chose a certain distractor to include, you can include notes there. And the classification, it should pop up the one that I just set it to, but it might not do that until after I hit save. So you can ignore that part. And then the references. As Darlene said, every reference or every item needs a reference. We do have a reference inventory here where, for example, if you're really familiar with a specific book, it will probably be in there. Let's just say Creme Cow. And then you can, usually it lets you type the page number in. I'm not sure why it's not, but.
That bottom right-hand corner under the page is value.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Sorry about that. I forgot. Okay.
This looks like an updated version.
Yeah, I think the system did just update and it might have changed the user interface just a little bit. But then after you put in the reference, it's right there. And then you can add notes if you want, or if the reference isn't in the list, you can also just type in what reference you want to use with like the ISBN. And then any other comments, and you can go ahead and just hit submit when you want to send it. I'm not going to do that because this is a silly item. But that is essentially it for the writing project. Did I miss anything, Darlene or Mischa?
I don't think so. Well, this one, there's no mentor, but usually at the bottom, if you are assigned a mentor, and usually new writers are, there'll be a submit to mentor button at the very bottom. But
Right.
Amy doesn't have a mentor, so that's why that button wasn't there. But you know, you can just submit it, but you'll want to submit to the mentor just so that you can get feedback from a more seasoned writer.
Right. Yeah. If you have a mentor and if you're a newer item writer, it's definitely a good idea to collaborate with them just so you can get comfortable with writing your items. And then you won't always have to work with a mentor, but it's a good idea to get started for sure. Okay. Well, I'm going to go back to this here. All right. So I see there's a few questions. We'll get to those in just a second. But for our new item writers that haven't joined a project yet, here are the next steps. So if you haven't signed up yet for volunteer opportunities, and if you haven't signed your statement of service, you can do so within the My ARDMS volunteer portal. And that is the email address for our volunteer engagement department. They manage the onboarding of new volunteers prior to them getting put into a project because the program managers take over at that point. There's an online item writing training that you would need to complete before you can get added to a project. And all the instructions will be on that volunteer portal for you to do so. And then from there, you'll get handed off to either myself, Darlene, or Liesl, and you'll be added to a writing project. We'll send you all the information that you need to get started, all the resources. They're available in the volunteer portal, but we'll also send them via email just so you can have them there too. And listed here are the different exam assignments for exam program managers. Liesl couldn't be on the call tonight, but she is for PS, abdomen, SPI, and BR.
Looks like
all right.
Questions.
And yeah, lots of questions. Just a reminder, we're going to send you a survey. If you could please complete it, that would be super helpful so we can gather some data. and it'll be very helpful to our future efforts as well. All right, so now let's look at these questions here.
Okay.
So there were a few questions regarding kind of logistics. Do we need to sign in? Is the lecture available for later viewing? I went ahead and typed in an answer. Hopefully everyone can see that. Another question that just popped in is, typically how long does it take, would you say, to craft an item start to finish? I can answer that, or Amy and Darlene, you're welcome to jump in.
My first thought is it kind of varies depending on what type of item it is. Like, for example, if it's something with a lot of media, it might be a little more intensive. But I would say probably like 20 or 30 minutes. Does that sound about right, Darlene?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, as well as 30 minutes. I mean, you may have a good idea, but then you want to find a reference that correlates that you have the correct answer as well. That might be, and then finding the exact page, you know, so that could be a little bit timely. And then finding a proper image if you want to use an image or a video. That might take some time, but I think for just general multiple choice questions, no image or media, I agree with Amy. I would say around 20 minutes.
Okay. And I see there's a question here. Do you need to resubmit to your mentor again after you have fixed the items as the mentor suggests? So once you make the fixes that the mentor suggests, I would say you're free to submit it normally, like not to the mentor, so it can go into our internal system and be ready for the editor review. As long as the mentor says like, okay, it's great, besides maybe change this to this or something, then yeah, you would be free to submit it regularly and not have to go back to the mentor at that point. Okay.
I see another question. Do you get educational credits for item writing? If I understand the question, we don't provide educational credits per se. What we do is provide CME waivers. So your triennium, you have a certain amount of CMEs that you need to contribute. There is a formula, which unfortunately I don't know off the top of my head. We can certainly follow up with you from our volunteer engagement department, but we do, based on, there's a certain cap, but based on so many items that you submit, we do lower your CME waiver total. So that is one incentive to provide to help us with content. Give me a moment here. Let me see what else is coming in.
Not only do they get the CME waivers, but you know, a lot of the comments that I've heard from some of the writers in my groups is that they feel honored to be able to contribute to their profession and to actually at some point see an item that they wrote going on the actual assessment, because we do review them. Some of the writers come on the committees and they can see the items that are going to be on the actual assessment, and they get great joy out of seeing one that they authored and it's going to be on the exam. So it's a, you know, it's you know, all in what you're looking for, but a lot of personal gratification.
Yeah, that's a more altruistic reason than the CME waivers. Absolutely.
Yeah, we like to recognize our volunteers for all their contributions. So definitely you're very appreciated, and it can help a lot with, you know, personal and professional goals. I see another question here. What can be done if you have outdated reference books and cannot find the reference within the bank that is available? So let me actually, hold on a second. I'm going to go back to this. So if you can't find the reference or you don't have a reference that's listed here, you can type something into the reference notes section, just saying, oh, I'm using this book, but it's not listed. Or, you know, you can always send an email to the exam program manager and we can work with you to get it figured out. I know sometimes it can be tricky because like you can't really preview the content of these reference books, but we'll definitely work with you to try to help you out as much as possible with that.
Yeah, we hope at some point down the road, or maybe in a few years from now, we'll be able to provide electronic resources for everything.
It's a goal.
Now, due to licensing issues and things like that, we haven't been able to provide that.
Oh, we've got another good question. So are we allowed to use images from the internet that are from radiology sites or peer-reviewed articles? The answer to that is no. They have to be, actually, there's a whole waiver essentially that you would need to work with your organization to basically release the images to Inteleos or ARDMS so that they can only be used for our testing purposes. We really don't want to find, or we don't want to have images on our exams that can be found on public domain, because that would kind of have a bit of a validity concern for our tests. So it would need to be essentially an item that you received or you obtained in practice, and then you would need to make sure that the image is essentially being released to the organization to be able to be used on an exam.
Yeah, and all name and identification would need to be removed. But we do
Right.
have a really, really robust image bank that, you know, you would most likely be able to find an appropriate image for your item.
And all the specifications for submitting media are also listed in the volunteer resources portal. So yeah, you can either, if you want to put in your own images, you can do that with the steps that we kind of just outlined, or you can just search within the image bank of images that are already approved for use. And I think, was that everything? All the questions? Do we have any more?
The only one that I see trickling in is from the time I might write and submit an item, roughly how long does it take for the item to potentially show up on an exam?
Somebody else want to answer that?
Yeah, that's a good
I'm
question.
happy.
A while. It may take a year or two, because we, you know, try to pre-test, you know, some of the items that haven't been on the exam before. And, you know, we try to keep them current. So like anything that's older is probably going to be up on the examination first, unless you have a very, very, very small item bank. But I would say at least a year.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
since
fair.
there's a
There's
few-
definitely a time lag.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Right.
Amy. I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, the items have to go through a lot of different steps and verification. And then at that point, they need to be selected from the item bank to be used on a specific form. And just kind of for some additional information, most of our item banks have at least 500 operational items, and we usually only select about 70 to 100 for each form for the scored items. And so definitely it is quite a long journey for an item from being submitted from the writer to becoming a scored item, just because of all those steps and the general timelines behind our form building processes.
Mhm. And a lot of the assessments, we build new forms every year. Others we do not, you know, it depends on the number of candidates. So we certainly do try to rotate the items as much as possible.
We got one more question. Another one about images. So yes, if you're using your own images from your practice, you would need to work with your organization to essentially waive or release the image to us so that it's approved for us to be able to use. And all of that information is on the volunteer resources portal. I think the waiver is there, the specifications for submitting media, and just other general media guidelines, like what kind of media can be used. Okay, one more question. How many items are expected to be written by each item writer, and is there a specific time frame? That's a very good question. I'm glad that you asked that. Right now, we don't have an actual hard deadline or requirement for the items to be written. Of course, we want you to write as much as you can reasonably. And I think typically we ask for between 5 and 10 at least, just so we can see your work and kind of, you know, make comments to help you improve if needed. And just based on the item writing project's requirements as well. It depends on how many writers we have in the project and what our goal is and all of that. But yeah, I would say probably like 5 to 10 in a year would be good. Does that sound right?
That sounds right. That sounds right. I mean, I have a couple of writers. I mean, I have one that writes hundreds every year. I don't know where they find the time, but they're very good. And others that maybe have, you know, 3 or 4 really, really good ones. And so, you know, it depends on
Yeah.
your time and how much time that you want to dedicate to this. But yeah, the more the merrier.
Yeah, definitely. We welcome as many as you want. And we go for quality over quantity, but we still like quantity too.
And in terms of a time frame, we have general projects that are open all year long. Sometimes we might open more targeted, time-sensitive projects, but we try to be available when folks can give us time. So we try to make things open all year round.
All right. Well, I think that concludes our presentation for the evening. Thank you all so much for joining. Hold on, we got another chat. Oh yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad that you enjoyed this webinar. All right. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to email the exam program manager specifically or the volunteer engagement email address that we included. And I hope everyone has a good evening.
Oh, we might want to mention that we're going to be opening up new projects in January for the examination. So if you're interested, please go to the volunteer portal and sign up and get trained, and we can place you right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. We really appreciate your time. And Amy and Darlene, thanks for such a lovely presentation.
And don't forget, we're going to send you a survey. So answer that. All right, great. Thank you all so much.
All right. Have a wonderful night.
Happy holidays. Stay safe. Thank you so much.